New Zealand Initiative supports the intention of the government's Fast Track Approvals Bill, but thinks it can be improved. I'm joined by Senior Fellow Nick Clark. So where are the areas, because obviously some people have expressed real concern that this legislation will give 2 or 3 ministers a huge amount of power. So where would you like to see the improvements made?
Yeah, thanks, Brent. So there's several improvements we would like to see for the bill to improve the quality of the bill. We support the bill, as you said. We think it's very necessary given the huge costs and the lengthy time delays in getting consents through the chute.
But just on that, so you don't think the fast track provisions that are currently there, that came in when the former Labor government introduced them from COVID, they're not enough? No,
I think there's a few issues with those. So, for example, these fast track provisions are a bit more. The balance is a bit more towards the economy as opposed to managing adverse effects for the environment, which is kind of a problem with the current Act. There are a few gaps apparently in the fast track thing that was brought over from the NBR that now is sitting a little bit just doesn't not quite as coherent. So there is a need for fast track legislation. I think the officials agree that there is a need for a standalone fast track provision that takes us from the current held over fast track into a new fast track.
But does this new one give ministers too much power?
Potentially. So we believe that there are issues with ministers having final approval. In an ideal world, you wouldn't need it. So in an ideal world, you have an RMA that would be enabling and would allow projects to go through without having to go through fast tracking. But fast tracking is necessary because of the current RMA. Now, we are a little bit concerned about having ministers as decision makers. Yes, ministers should definitely refer. We certainly support the use of expert panels to consider these proposals and put forward consent conditions and the like. There are 2 ways to address concerns about ministers being the decision maker. I think the concerns are, it's not that we have a problem with the ministers. It's more of a concern about it's almost like a potential perceptions issue. So New Zealand has a very strong reputation as being clean and very low corruption, and we're not saying that ministers would be corrupt or unclean, but there is certainly a need to make sure that everything looks really, really good and above board, and that there can be no misinterpretation about that.
Because critics are arguing that those who lobby strongest are going to get their project through, aren't they?
Yeah, so there's a few things we would like to see, and that's understandable from their perspective. They want to put through their projects. So we feel that there are some things that could be put in place that would ease those concerns. First of all, we think that the eligibility criteria for projects should include economic efficiency in there, with cost-benefit analysis used to prioritise projects for referral and approval. We also think expert panels should include expertise on economic analysis, because the criteria for the expert panels in the bill is silent on economic analysis. So if there's a big aspect of the bill's purpose is around the economic benefits, then the expert panel should be able to interrogate that. In terms of final decision approval, we've suggested in our paper that it could either be given to the expert panel rather than ministers. That's not without risk in itself, because these very members of expert panels could be subject to lobbying activities as well, so it's not necessarily a panacea. But if ministers remain decision makers, we think that disclosure requirements could be beefed up. For example, a requirement that if ministers, say, decide to decline expert panel recommendations, they need to be able to state very clearly why they're doing so. We want to see potentially, if applicants having meetings or discussions with ministers, that should be disclosed as well. And any political donations applicants make should be disclosed too. It's about transparency. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, so to speak.
Yeah. And in terms of I think you've also suggested that the Minister for the Environment should come into the
Yep.
play as well.
Yes, absolutely. So it seemed a little bit curious that the Minister for the Environment isn't a decision-making minister, given that minister is responsible for the RMA more generally. So, there's quite a bit of criticism around environmental, about the bill's impact on environmental effects, and we think that that having the Minister for the Environment in there would help give a bit of weight to those issues when it comes to making decisions.
Because in terms of having those ministers involved, making the final decisions, I mean, obviously some of these big projects do excite quite a lot of debate with opponents who might have environmental concerns often. But do you think it'll actually politicise that even more and sharpen that level of opposition that you might see?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a concern that we would have is around the pendulum swinging too much in the other direction subsequent to. So if there's a change in government, you could see the whole pendulum swung dramatically. I mean, it would be great if we could get to a point where we had some sort of consensus around infrastructure. These are big projects, a lot of them. There's a need for not just better processes for consenting, but the certainty to be able to plan and invest. And ideally, we would have a situation where you could get some sort of consensus around these projects.
Well, in that sense, would it be better for the legislation perhaps to be a little bit more narrow and focus purely on infrastructure, roads, rail, power, etc.? I mean, rather than obviously, some ministers, I think of Shane Jones, have talking about obviously for the mining and those sorts of things, which are going to be much more probably controversial in the public sphere.
Yeah, I think the issue, I think part of the problem is that there's a lot of, infrastructure is clearly important and needs to be, there's a lot of fast tracking that needs to happen there. Some of the projects, in terms of more development-oriented projects, they are important too. I won't, housing projects, for example, water storage and the like, yes, aquaculture, mining. I mean, I guess the government's got a view that those economic benefits need to be unlocked in order to get our productivity up. And our productivity is pretty poor, and infrastructure is a key component about that, but the ability to be able to make use of our natural resources in a more efficient and effective way is important. So that what you make a good point, but I think we would certainly support the ability to make reasonable investments in those areas in an efficient way, without undue conditions being placed on them or things just being rejected out of hand.
And presumably the New Zealand Initiative will be making submissions along these lines to the Select Committee, because it's going to be a process for the public to have their say.
Correct. So the note that's on our website will probably form the basis of our submission.
Nick Clark, thank you for your time.
Thank you.